So my wife and I decided to go see Jesus Revolution in the theater this past weekend. We both thought it was a good film, about true events, and I want to point out that I do think it was worth seeing. I really do. I thought it captured the tone of that moment in American history very well. There were a lot of good Christian lessons and messages presented. I even felt convicted at one point during the film, if I'm honest with you. And there were a lot of genuinely moving, gripping moments, both moments that break your heart and moments that lift it, which is always good in a movie. My wife and I both were moved to tears more than once during the film. Though, of course, in my case, they were all manly tears. Now, that being said, my one major criticism of the movie Jesus Revolution is that in this entire film about a Christian movement that started in opposition to the sexual revolution, the word sex was not used even one time throughout this entire film. I did mention that it takes place during the sexual revolution, right? I did mention that. Now, there were hippies in the movie holding up signs that said that very famous hippie line, "Make love, not war," so sex was very subtly alluded to. But other than that one little detail, this very important subject was completely and utterly neglected, if not intentionally avoided. Now, I think that such blatant neglect of a very most important subject is a travesty and quite indicative of a greater issue taking place in Christianity today, which is that Christians are afraid to talk about difficult issues. They're particularly fearful of any mention of that dreaded word, sex. You even reference that subject, you are likely to get stoned. Now, in fact, Christian leaders, we're talking about Christian leaders here, have such an aversion to the subject of sex that many of them won't even say the word in church. This is true of pastors as well as their congregations. Okay, there is this legalistic attitude that has taken root in the Christian community today, that the word sex is some sort of curse word, a forbidden subject, better not to be mentioned or addressed. All right, out of sight, out of mind, that filthy topic, yuck. All right, that's the attitude of the American church today. Don't even talk about it, don't mention it, don't look in the direction of any reference to it, just completely avoid it, out of sight, out of mind. So how's that working out, church people? All you church folks, are our congregations more moral because of this? Is the world a better place? No, in fact, the very opposite is true. The conscious avoidance of the very mention of sex means that we also don't discuss sexual morality as we should. The unavoidable result is that people stop taking sexual morality seriously. If it's never addressed, it's never going to be taken seriously. And it is now normal for Christian youths to think of sex in the same way that the rest of the culture does, because that's where they hear the most about sex from. If Christian influences aren't talking to them about it, aren't influencing them about it, then they're going to hear about it from TV, movies, their peer groups. They're going to hear about it somewhere, and it's not going to be the version of sexual morality that Christians should be teaching. Our young people, our Christian young people no less, are dehumanizing and destroying themselves with regular and heavy pornography use and casual intimate relationships, just as the non-believers do. That is what they are doing on a regular basis. And as rare as it is to meet a 20-year-old atheist who is still a virgin before marriage, it is now nearly just as rare to meet a single Christian 20-year-old who is still a virgin. The neglect of the church and of Christians as a whole to be adults about sex, about sexual issues, has very real consequences. And this has been building up over decades, so these consequences have had plenty of time to take effect. The only people who seem comfortable anymore talking about sex in church seem to be the progressive Christians. The people who are raising pride flags in churches and inviting drag queens to speak at Sunday school. Yes, this is happening in churches these days. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. This is actually happening in churches in America. And these false teachers seem to think that they are just being compassionate by affirming every sort of depravity under the sun and by feeding people lies, but there is no compassion in leading people astray. In fact, I would argue that it is unspeakably spiteful to keep people trapped in their sin, forever longing for freedom that their hearts may never know, because some fraud in the pulpit wanted to be a people pleaser. What has led to this state of decadence in our churches? Why do believers so often avoid the much needed candor of talking about and teaching about issues like sex? Very important issues, mind you. Well, the answer is quite simple. Christians in our culture today don't like to be uncomfortable. They don't want to be uncomfortable. They like to hear the pastor at the pulpit encourage them. And pastors, God help them, that they are more than willing to enable that. Most Christian leaders today aren't leading anybody. They, they aren't feeding people spiritually. They're not leading. They're not feeding people spiritually, which is their job. They're more akin to motivational speakers than to pastors. Sure, people need encouragement, but that is not your whole job, pastors. Okay, that is not your job, Stephen Furtick. These pastors just spend Sunday morning saying things to make you feel good and tiptoe around the difficult subjects that people desperately need to hear about and be taught about. When I was at my last church, the one I attended before the church I'm currently a member of, I was at my last church for a little over 3 years. Now, do you know how many times a very important topic like sexual morality, kind of a big one, was even mentioned in that time? In the whole time I was at this church? Once. Just once. Just one time in an entire span of 3.5 years was sex even mentioned in passing. Just one time. Oh, but the congregation was comfortable. They all got their Sunday morning coffee, their rock band worship jam sessions, and their weekly motivational speech, so they were all comfortable, you know? And that's all they asked for, and that's all they got. That's all that. The one time that the pastor even thought to give a sermon on a slightly uncomfortable topic, he actually took a poll among his congregation, asking them which of a certain 3 topics they would actually be comfortable with him talking about in church. He took a poll. One of the 3 topics to choose from that he said I may end up talking about was homosexuality, and people had a fit about that one. Oh, you can't talk about that. That's no, you can't talk about that in church. You might convict someone. Heaven forbid. Furthermore, when I would talk to people at the congregation of this church about my book, which I was still writing at the time, I was just talking about it, in which delves into the subject of sexual morality, as well it should. Many of the people I told about it in the congregation they were taken aback. One elderly person even asked me, "Well, do you really think that that's an appropriate topic for a Christian book?" I'm not even exaggerating. That question was actually asked in the church. I don't mean to imply that this church hasn't done some good, because they have, and I've seen it. I've been a part of it. All right, but if I were to even bring up a topic such as sex, or so much as whisper the word, there would be gasps of surprise, and in fact there were at times. But this is how wussified the American church has become. They are more concerned with the fact that I said the word sex in church than with the fact that the people in their church are being sexually immoral. I have to say that is largely why the culture as a whole is crumbling. I mean, is it any wonder why the radical sexual ideologies running rampant in this culture of ours are growing more powerful and more prevalent in the West, when the church is too afraid to even say the word sex? Wake up, church people. The culture is imploding, and we are not innocent here. The LGBT ideology is becoming national doctrine. The pride flag, the most seen and recognizable religious symbol in the West. Okay, the church has failed everybody falling for the lies of that ideology. We are not innocent here. The Christian teens are just as badly behaving as the rest of the teens, because nobody taught them how to behave. Nobody gave them a reason to care. We didn't want to talk to them about sex and why it's important to save oneself from marriage, because Christians don't want to talk about stuff like that. It's dirty. It's inappropriate. We shouldn't talk about it. This doesn't start or stop with the issue of sex, of course, but it's by far the clearest example of how the church is failing. I'd go so far as to say that most young Christians don't know what they believe or why they believe it. I would say that applies to the vast majority of young Christians, even grown Christians for that matter. So yes, the church has failed them too. Now, it's not all bad news, folks. God is still very much alive, and He is working toward the good of all. That much is 100% true. I believe that with all my heart. Now, We just need to stop being lazy and complacent. We Christians in the West have become quite complacent, quite comfortable, quite lazy. And it needs to stop. We need to stop playing defense against a hostile culture, offering token resistance, and actually do our duty as believers. I don't know why this is such a hard concept to wrap our heads around, but guys, there are Christians overseas right now who are in prison because they even said the name Jesus. There are Christians overseas who are killed because they had a cross in their possession. So what the heck is our excuse? We are not experiencing anything near that level of persecution. So what are we doing? Sometimes I don't think that we're even in touch with Jesus anymore as Christians in this nation. I don't think we even remember who he is. Guys, we need to experience the truth of Christ. And just as importantly, we need to share it. Because our world, our culture is starving for it. If you want a little bit of understanding or inspiration as to what it looks like to be fully committed to Christ, read Fox's Book of Martyrs, all right? And read about what the early Christians went through because they knew Jesus and because they wanted other people to know him. Just because of that. Just because many of them were living out their faith. Read about what they went through and how so many of them suffered and died for the truth. And then contrast that with how we live in the U.S. as Christians. And see if you can continue living the same way. And you know what? Just beyond that, read the scriptures for yourselves. Because in case you hadn't noticed, people will always fall short and disappoint. Always have, always will. Pastors are not immune to this rule. And I know I'm certainly not immune to this rule. I mean, that I can guarantee. I am not perfect. I am arguably the furthest from perfect. And at least that's how I feel most days. But Jesus will never fall short. Okay, God will never disappoint in the end. And this is his word right here. All right, and this is truth. This is the word of life. And you don't have to read it in Greek, obviously. But this is what you need to know right here. Right here, this is everything you need to know. You don't always have to rely on unavoidably flawed people to tell you the truth. It is right here for you. If you live in the West, you have access to this. You have access to the truth. So, what are you waiting for? That being said, we are not excused ourselves from sharing the truth. Okay, we are not excused from this, the whole truth. Not keeping back the inconvenient or uncomfortable bits, because those are important too. Okay, now I'm not saying you have to start preaching to people about things that they can't possibly be expected to understand, because, I mean, people who aren't familiar with this stuff aren't going to understand the deep theology of it. We all have to start somewhere with baby food before we can start graduating to steak, right? But the world, overall, the world is hurting for the truth. God's children are lost. We can no longer deny this. I mean, have you seen our culture? God's children are lost. They are wandering in darkness, searching for the truth. Have you looked closely at these people in these sexual ideologies? These are not all crazy people. These are people who are hurting and people who are searching. Okay, they are searching for truth. They are searching for meaning. They are searching for love. We know this. They are searching for life. They want to know what it is to feel alive. They're just searching in all the wrong places. And we cannot ignore them. We can't just shrug our shoulders at them, point our fingers, and just call them crazy. These are the people who need Jesus the most. And this is what they are searching for, whether they are consciously aware of it or not. This is what they need. And many of them are following passions of the flesh. Yes. Many of you listening are probably doing the same. And this is the very thing that the church is too uncomfortable to speak on. Like it or not, there is a war going on, a spiritual war, a constant spiritual war for countless souls. But it seems to be a war in which we are content to only let the other side use weapons. They are firing live ammunition, while we seem content to shoot back with rubber band guns. All right? And the lost in this world cannot afford for us to be placid and non-committal. Their eternity is at stake. Do you realize this? Do you realize how high of a cost that is? They need to be saved, and we need to fight like crazy to reach them. You don't leave a man behind. You just don't. When he is wounded on the field, when he is hurting and in pain, you run through the hailstorm of bullets to reach him. In Christ, that is your brother, and he needs a helping hand. So will you follow Christ's example and go to him, in spite of the pain you may experience? Or will you just leave him to his fate without even trying? Our youth are beyond porn-consumed and sex-obsessed. There is no other way to put it. They are following the lies of this cult of pleasure that is leading them further and further down the path of destruction. They have all been hit hard. They're all hurting. They're all wounded. Do you not care, church? Where have you been? Where are you right now when they need you? In fact, they have needed you for a long time. Where have you been? Are your hearts so cold to those who are lost and those who are hurting? Or are you just indifferent? Are you just lukewarm to their suffering? You know what God says about the lukewarm in faith? He says this in Revelation: "These are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth." So apparently the Lord would prefer that you aren't even a believer, rather than that you are a believer, but you just don't care enough. Because you were given the truth of Christ, but did not care enough to share it, and instead hid your light under a bushel that you were given, because you were so indifferent to those whom Christ loves so much, because you left one of God's lost and hurt children on the field to die in darkness. Maybe you will receive the same indifference. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that just hurts to even think about. You get to heaven, you finally get to see Christ face to face, and you get a cold shoulder? If that doesn't hurt you to even think about, then I'm not sure you're really even a believer. The searching people need the truth, but are instead finding the lies that the world is offering. And Christians are either too cowardly to bring the truth to them, or those who are just doing so with judgment and without love. And this is scaring them away from the truth. These Christians come across as snobs because they just want to feel superior, which I probably don't have to tell you is rather antithetical to the way of Jesus, who is literally God, but who submitted himself to the level of the sinners, to meet them face to face. If you think you're too high and mighty to deal with these people, you don't know who Jesus is. But the other side of the Christians are just too busy trying to stay comfortable to bother loving anyone, or to bother sharing the truth of Christ with those who desperately need it. The lost need love and truth. They need both, but so few are willing to offer just one of those things, much less both of them. Now, Jesus wants all of his lost children to come home. Okay, but our job, our calling, is to help the lost to find him. That's what we are called to do, but we can't do that from a place of comfort, which is what we've been trying to do for decades, if not centuries. Okay? Christians, we can't do that. We just can't. It doesn't work that way. There is nothing comfortable about sharing the truth, especially to those who may not want to hear it. Trust me, I know this. We can't keep hiding our heads in the sand, folks. We just can't do it. We can't keep avoiding difficult truths and topics and avoid uncomfortable moments. Okay, countless souls are at stake and the cost is too high for us to neglect them. We can't keep letting the lost wander. Do you want to get to heaven and have God ask you face to face who you brought with you, only to turn around and realize that you're all alone? Do you want God to ask you, why did you hide the truth under a bushel? Do you know what that could have done for this person and this person and this person? They could be standing here with me too. But instead, he is lost to me. To the American pastor, God might ask, well, why is it that you shared encouragement but never fed my children with the truth? Why were there so many lost among your flock? Why did you lead my children astray? Why did you let my children starve? We don't get to decide what the truth is, folks. We just don't, and it needs to be shared. All of it. It won't be easy, it won't be comfortable to go out and tell it to those who need to hear it the most. It won't be. If you're always cozy, you're not doing it right. That much I can assure you. Form relationships with people who you know need Jesus. Be loving to them. Don't affirm their sin or bad lifestyle, because that's not loving, but be kind to them. And leave the comfort of your church bubble for a minute and go where the sinners are. If the lost were already within your Christian circle, they wouldn't be lost. They need to be brought home. That's your job. And look, when I say go where the sinners are, I'm not telling you to go hang out in a bad neighborhood where there are shootings happening all the time. I don't want you to put yourself in danger, but guys, we spend so much time standing back from a distance and watching people destroy themselves and judging them quietly. Sometimes not so quietly. Instead of engaging with them, talking to them, forming relationships with them, loving them. That's what they need. They don't need to be affirmed, but they do need to be cared about. Kind of in the way that God cares about them.